I feel like that might be better. So, hey everyone, my name is Charlie, and believe it or not, I did actually try to do something with my hair today before deciding, actually, I didn't see this in the cards for my Tuesday, so I'm putting on a hat instead. I'm wearing it indoors because when you're 3 decades on this planet, that's exactly what you can do. Did I say hello? Well, if I didn't, I've said it now. Today I will be talking about nothing in particular, which is a lie already, because I have decided that today I want to use this video as almost like a currently reading style thing, discussing the books that I read over the last week, like so many of my fellow booktubers do. Some that spring to mind immediately are Sarah of Hardcover Hearts, Bob the Bookerer, and Charlie of Charlie Brooks Reads. And let's not forget Brian over at Bookish, who regularly actually manages to get videos out there that do something like this. Anyway, so let's talk about some of the books that I have read within the last week, discussing, firstly, the books that I was in the process of reading last Tuesday. The first of those being Orlando by Virginia Woolf. As I've just mentioned Charlie, I'll mention her again. She got in touch with me last week and said that she was reading this book and I ought to read it. I mentioned the racism last week and how, regardless of the fact that this book was written 95 years ago, racism was never right, so it still feels apt to mention it. And then the discussion comes up with other people talking about, should that be removed from the text? And then you think, well, actually, if we do look at it contextually, then it does give an idea of the times that these writers were living in. And as some people pointed out to me in the text, in the comments of that video, Virginia Woolf was a very privileged white woman who hated the working classes and saw them as beneath her. And regardless of her struggles, she still held on to some disdain for certain people within the world. So should that come across in her writing when we're discussing the book? In terms of Orlando, I found it quite an interesting story. Last week I just reached the point where Orlando awakens as a woman and immediately changes the way in which they behave. And for me, I know that other people have said that this was a standout feminist text for them, and Virginia Woolf wrote in a style that I admire as a writer, and I can see how it has influenced other people who are writing today. However, as I've said, I do think it's important to mention the problematic aspects of her books, whilst also referencing how old her books were, and only talking about this from a personal standpoint as opposed to factoring in anyone else's beliefs around the way in which books should be critiqued, read or reviewed. Because I felt like this book still fell into common tropes of actually seeing seeing two genders. Firstly, seeing the binary as all there is in terms of gender. And again, other people are going to have different experience of this, but Orlando's attitudes and behaviours change when they become a woman, and immediately it's as though their role in society has changed. Now, this did work as a way to almost show the constraints put on women in society at the time and over the few hundred years that this novel takes place. Again, this is a character who, due to their privilege, due to their wealth, due to their money, they're able to live for centuries, regardless of the fact that Orlando actually has these few problems. And these that would be major problems that Victorian writers have talked about financially, and just thinking of Anthony Trollope, which is why I'm pointing over there, I can see all of his books. Anthony Trollope discussed finances and actually went into the difficulties surrounding all of this. Yet within this novel, it's almost as though they're just glossed over, like money will always be there, it is no object. And that was one of the sticking points for me. So for me, it's one of these things where I've always said about beautiful prose, for me as a reader, I need the plot to back it up, and I wasn't finding that with Orlando. Again, maybe there is no plot, maybe it is just this love letter to, was it Vita Sackville West? But I did require something more from the novel, really. I'm aware that maybe looking at a book that came out so long ago and was written so long ago, when ideas about gender were perhaps so rigid, that it lent itself to this novel to have very clear defining factors of what makes a man and what makes a woman. And I don't know. I didn't understand this huge change of a character that came about when Orlando became a woman. I appreciated the almost fairy tale aspect of the way in which this book was written. And again, it was something that I could perhaps see myself rereading in future. It was a book that was almost middling for me, that I liked and I didn't dislike, but also isn't up there with like the pinnacle of fiction, and I found myself criticising it more. And when I was finishing it simply because I wanted it to be done. I just feel like I've read more modern texts that might have built upon Orlando, and maybe reading them first has given me a different opinion. Had I read Orlando first and seen it as the basis of so many new novels, because I do see some of where Jeanette Winterson might have been inspired and where Rachel Cusk, as I say, might have been inspired. Rachel Cusk in terms of prose, Jeanette Winterson in terms of the way in which time isn't necessarily something that exists within her books. I suppose that could also have been said to have inspired Deborah Levy in the way in which Deborah Levy wrote her trilogy of memoirs. I'd say it was a good experience of reading because it caused me to have lots of questions and discussions about the text with myself. Then we come to Prozac Nation by Elizabeth Wurtzel, and I finished this book on Thursday. It snowed a lot, and so I ended up having to cancel the writers group. A few people have contacted me who weren't going to come, and so I got in touch with someone and said, do we keep it going ahead? I wasn't going to be able to get there anyway, and eventually more and more people were saying let's postpone to this week, so I ended up cancelling it, staying home and reading, which is when I finished Prozac Nation. And in a similar experience to Orlando, I was finishing this book just to get it finished. I still found this memoir of the author's depression and struggles with mental health extremely dense, sometimes unreadable, but unreadable because of how dark the tale was getting. When I read the afterword by the author, I understood the reasons that she wrote the memoir in the way she did. However, that doesn't mean that I still think that this is a great piece of memoir, and I will be donating it back to the charity shop after this. I think that the most interesting bit to me comes towards the end, and is the final summation of this book. And I feel as though the epilogue and the afterword could have been all that Wurtzel released of this book, and it still would have had the same impact. I felt like there was a lot to be said because I'd had the same questions myself around the want to sometimes thrust medication upon people in the hopes of making a person go away, as opposed to actually getting a person to talk. I'm not saying that medication isn't necessary when it comes to mental health struggles. I'm just saying that sometimes I do get concerned that we just throw medication at people without actually helping them to try and navigate mental health struggles as well. I feel like there needs to be a balance, and sometimes I've seen that that isn't the case with people that I know. And Elizabeth Wurtzel's almost predicting that happening in the mid-90s. I understand why the writer wrote this memoir in the way in which she wrote this memoir. However, there are moments of light within this book that get alluded to that we haven't actually seen, so that when they get mentioned, it's almost like, well, we've been following you for 200 pages now. Why did you just drop this in here? It's almost like I needed a better idea of what her childhood was like to be able to understand the things that she was unpicking. And also, there was a repetitive nature to this memoir. And I get that that will have happened to the author, but that's one of the reasons that this memoir doesn't really work for me in the same way that others do. I feel like the author could have pulled a stronger moment from her life and used that to represent her struggles at one point, as opposed to showing them all. And some people will say, well, this is a memoir, so surely you are going to have some repetition there, you're going to have these same scenes, and that's true. But as I say, and I mentioned it last week, good memoir people will use narrative techniques, and sometimes that means cutting characters who might have been there at the time for a more dramatic impact. Memoirs still have a fictional aspect to them, the same way biography does. Biography less so, because usually you're just bullet pointing what's gone on in a person's life and listing it, whereas in memoir, people are trying to talk more about one moment in a person's life and one aspect of a person's life. And I just don't think that the author really considered everything that she was putting into this book. I felt like I could tell that it had been written over a number of years, and wish that maybe it had been gone over with a fine-tooth comb, as they say, to properly see where it was being a bit repetitious, and when the author was trying to get you to remember people that had turned up 200 pages before and then disappeared from the page, and it was almost like, well, we were in this place in the prologue, how did we get here? And there's just a disconnection in the novel overall. It's not a novel, I keep calling it a novel. There was a disconnection in the book overall that came from this feeling like all these disparate melodramatic pieces had been thrust together. And I still maintain, I can tell that this was written by somebody in their early 20s, and it is still something that I almost wish had been written upon reflection, as opposed to somebody who was living within that moment. Then I read Translations by Brian Friel, which is a play that I was sent as part of the Plec Secret Santa. Still have no idea who sent this, but I do know that it's now pronounced Ballybeg. And so the British Army is going across to this small Irish village, and well, they're going over to Ireland and anglicising their names and creating a map of the place. And this book ends up discussing language. It is dark and it is humorous in this play, as these characters go over discussing language and the way that language can be politicised, and how English is almost seen as the be-all and end-all when it comes to languages, and how everyone ought to know it. And it's almost about the way in which the English seek to make things easier for themselves, and throw their authority around the place when really they're just arseholes. That's the only way I can put it. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the discussions of language and the way in which the playwright was able to connect all of these characters and show their connections in very few words. The only thing that I questioned was maybe how rushed the ending was, but also recognised that this is a play, so it probably had to be for the stage in which it was set. There was a sense of inevitability to that ending anyway, so perhaps there was no need to prolong it as much as I would have liked some more of this play to have existed. Either way, if you were the person who sent me this play, thank you. It's definitely staying on my shelves and will be one that I revisit. And I do think that if you read that book whose name I still can't remember, that was written by Audrey Magee, was it The Colony last year? And that was longlisted for the Booker. I can't remember if it was shortlisted. If you read and liked that, then Translations might be a place for you to go, because it's discussing similar themes. And it almost feels like a precursor to that novel. And just now, I have finished Cat Lady by Dawn O'Porter, and this has taken me a long time to finish. I say this because I read 90 pages in one go and then just put it aside, and then felt as though I wasn't actually going to get back to this book. And then came downstairs and read 210 pages this morning. And there is a great unravelling that happens in the middle of this book. I didn't expect it to happen when it did, but it changed the trajectory of the novel in my head. And the manner in which the narrator talks within the book changed as well. The narratorial voice went through a change. This was very much a case of showing over telling done correctly, and I very much appreciated that, and it gave me a better idea of who the narrator was in the beginning of the book, the reason that she behaved in the way she did, and it was almost, you recognise that the narrator had been going through the world with a blinkered view, and you get the reasons why she had done this, and this great unravelling happens where we almost tear apart the narrator's character as we gain more understanding about her and then rebuild her again. And I didn't expect that from this book. I thought it's going to be a nice little contemporary novel, similar to, as I said last week, Elena Oliphant is Completely Fine. And the more I read of this book, the more that it discussed the grief that one feels when losing a pet, which isn't what the book is about. Basically, our narrator joins a group for people who are grieving their pets, despite the fact that her cat isn't dead itself. And this is because she is feeling something, but she doesn't know what it is and doesn't know where to place that energy. So she starts lying about her cat being dead. But then a sequence of events happens within the centre of this novel. And like I say, changed the trajectory. And when I thought the novel was over and we got another 30 pages, originally I was like, it feels like it ended there. But I realised that these final 30 pages needed to happen because it helped to round everything off, as opposed to leaving all these threads dangling. And it made perfect sense to me, and I was thrilled by the way in which this book ended. And I feel like this could make a fantastic film. I do. I feel like it would be weirdly a fantastically festive film. I know we're still in January, but something that you could watch at the end of the year, all cozy with your family. I keep saying it to Emily of Novelle Novels, and this is definitely a book that Emily of Novelle Novels should read. I'm definitely going to get my sister to read this one. I didn't expect it to take the direction it did, and I didn't expect to enjoy this book as much as I ended up enjoying it, because I'd been avoiding reading it because I thought it was going to be a certain type of book. And in the end, it challenged those expectations. Do I think it's the most amazing book in the world? No. But did I have a good time reading it? Yes. Those are all the books that I have finished this week. I'm now going to talk about some of the books that I am currently reading. The first being Vita Nostra by Maryna and Serhiy Dyachenko, translated by Julia Meitov Hersey. This book has been recommended by Matthew Sciarappa for years, and I got it at Christmas. So this young woman called Sasha is on holiday when a man arrives and starts presenting her with some tasks that seem impossible. When she completes these tasks, certain things happen to her, and over time she finds out that these have been tasks that will get her into this, what's it called? The Institute of Special Technologies. And when she arrives, mysterious goings-on are happening that seem to be related to books that she has to read but are not written in a language which she can read, yet she seems to be gaining some knowledge from them. And all the students in the upper years seem to be going through certain bodily malformations that she doesn't understand. It is certainly darker than I anticipated. I'm not quite sure what's going on yet, but I did read 109 pages in one go when I first started reading this on Thursday, and I just haven't had the chance to pick it up again since. But for a book that I was scared to read because of how small the print was, and because of what I thought it was going to be about, I am suitably impressed. And I have returned, finally, to the collected stories of Katherine Mansfield. And I had a So, firstly, now it's getting on for 2 years since Hardcover Hearts hosted a read-along of Ali Smith's seasonal quartet. And within one of the books, Ali Smith referenced Katherine Mansfield a lot. I believe that it was in Winter. So I went out and I bought this collection with the intention of reading one story every day until I'd finished the book. I did that for about 100 pages and then just didn't go back to the book, and it's been nearly 2 years now, like I say. So within the last week I've actually picked it up, and I've realised that some of the books, I've realised that it's actually separated into Katherine Mansfield's collections. So my plan is to finish reading the first collection in January, which will mean that I finished Bliss, and then read The Garden Party in February, and hopefully try and have this book finished this year. It's 800 pages, but there is a silence to Katherine Mansfield's prose, that's what I'll say, and I particularly like that. It's been nice to return to them because of this silence. And then there was one story, the most recent one that I read, that I was just thrilled by, because it almost goes into the merits and demerits of a possible relationship over just one evening, and it was just superb. So I'm looking forward to that project that I've given myself. We are now on the 24th of January, I think, and I have a few things that I wanted to read this month that I still haven't read. The first being Doris, my own book. I and Charlie of Charlie Book Reads, myself and Charlie of Charlie Book Reads, are hosting a read-along of all 4 of the Doris books. And this month I have to read Our Doris, which is the first in the series, and one I haven't been back to for a few years now. I think I last read it in 2020. So I want to read that. It's relatively short, so I should be able to. And people have been contacting me who are also joining the read-along to tell me what they've liked about the book, and they're mentioning things that I had forgotten, so that's nice. And so we're hosting a live show on the 7th of February at 7:30 GMT in the evening. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what people have to say about the book. If you do have any questions beforehand, then you can send them to myself or Charlie, and we will make sure they're read and answered during that. But you can also come along on the night for a chat, ask questions, and we'll just be discussing the book and discussing anything that I have forgotten, or some behind the scenes gossip about this book that might have influenced later books. Another book that I want to read I mentioned last week, which is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and I just know that so many people have read this book and talked about how heartbreaking this book was to them, and I've read the start of it and found the prose just startling in terms of how good it is. So I'm looking forward to reading this, even if it is going to be somewhat dark. I've yet to read Toni Morrison, and I might as well start. And then another project I gave myself this year, without actually... Originally I toyed with the idea of making a vlog of this whole process, and now I don't think I'm going to. But I want to read My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I want to read the 4 books in the Neapolitan Quartet, again, spacing them out over each month of the year. I only need 4 months, there's 4 books. So the first is My Brilliant Friend, and I want to read that within the next week as well, which is hopefully possible. I used to be a 3 books a week type of person, so I don't see why I shouldn't be now. So, last week, I don't know where this vehicle's racing around outside. Last week, I purchased 3 books from the charity shop. And, I've purchased another 3 this week, despite the fact I'm supposed to be trying to read more books on my shelf. I'm probably going to mention that every week as well. The first is The World's Wife by Caroline Duffy. I need to go back through my reading journal and find out whether I've read this poetry collection already. I don't know if I have, but even if I have, I want to read it again, because which one did I open up? I think it was Aesop's Wife. Mrs. Aesop, on page 19, I read that and had a laugh. It might have been because I read the entire thing in a northern accent, but still. And then I got Fierce Invalids Home from Hot Climates by Tom Robbins. I have another book behind me that I purchased from the charity shop by this author and haven't read it yet. So I don't know why I've got this book, apart from the fact there was a parrot on the cover, and the cover was so bright and this book copy had been unread. I was just like, well, I'll take it. I'll take it. And finally, we have a book that I have already read years ago. I can actually tell you how long ago it was, because I know that it was one of the earliest books that I read in the year that I read it. Yep, there you go. I first read Emotionally Weird by Kate Atkinson in 2012. And this is the first time that I've seen a copy come into the charity shop whilst I've been there. And it was almost kismet how it happened, because I've been having some ideas about my charity shop novel recently. Because at the moment there are two perspectives. Well, there's two voices. We have a first-person narrator of whom certain readers have already met. And then we have the third-person story of a character called Martin. And as we know, this book has a radio play which is a precursor to this. And I have been thinking about experimenting with form within this book and having some of the radio play inserted into the novel as a means to show some of the characters who come into the charity shop and give you a better idea of the inner world of the charity shop, whilst also showcasing the main story that's going on, because we're very much going to be in Martin's head throughout the novel and then this first person narrator. So I don't know how much of the charity shop you'll get to see. Emotionally Weird has many different stories going on within it. So we have this first person voice here of one character. We have this manuscript of a book within a book. And then we have the main story as well. And I know that I didn't appreciate this book as much as I could have done 11 years ago when I was only just getting into reading adult fiction. And so I am looking forward to reading Kate Atkinson, this book in particular, after all these years, and seeing how it... seeing how I feel after so many years away from it, but also hopefully helping myself figure out how I want to write certain bits of the charity shop novel. Which, as you know, all of the Martin scenes currently planned. The main plot is there, but it's one of these things where the plan doesn't feel full, and my way into this world wasn't actually found until I wrote this first person narrator into the book. And now I'm finding that I really want to be able to show this whole world. So it might be a long book, but it's also a standalone, and I don't know when it's getting written or how it's getting written, but I just know that I need this other voice within there. Be that as the radio play, which is what I'm currently thinking, to have snippets of radio style play, radio script style play in there. I don't know how to properly say that. As well as having the main narrative, but I just know that it needs that extra voice in there. After I saw you last week, I took Sally for a walk around Mac Forest, and it was very foggy. And as we were coming down the other side, Sally had walked ahead and she turned around and couldn't see me, and she just started barking, because I don't know whether you know this about my dog. When we walk off lead, if she ever does something where she's like gone away a bit, I just hide and then she'll come running. And because she couldn't see me, clearly she got a little bit distressed and started barking into the fog until I whistled and she realised that the figure approaching her was indeed me. As I say, Wednesday, Thursday wasn't able to get out because of the snow. I probably could have gone down the towpath, but I hadn't chanced driving in Wally's until Sunday. And I'll tell you for why. So I was in work Friday, and then on Saturday I got a message to tell me that my sister had chosen to take our father up to Scotland with her because they were going to pick up my younger brother who's been there for a week and drive him back down. And this meant that the mother and I had the house to ourselves on Saturday, but my sister had to leave her collie Floss here. So everything's fine. The mother and I order a Chinese takeaway and get through 3 bottles of Pinot Grigio. I also, despite the fact that I'm supposed to have been off sugar for years and, you know, would like to maintain the weight loss, decided that the best thing I could do was drink a wine glass full of Baileys. Don't recommend. I don't actually like it, but I couldn't pour it back into the bottle because the glass had flaming Pinot Grigio in it before. Anyway, that happened. We watched Mrs. Brown's Boys the Movies, which is It's not necessarily a film that I would recommend. It's not the best comedy in the world. It's not the best writing. But when you're mildly inebriated playing Scrabble and you just want a bit of background noise, it works out okay. And what did we do after that? Sunday came round. I introduced my mother to the Katherine Tate's second appearance as Donna Noble with Partners in Crime from series 4 of the new Doctor Who. And I think she enjoyed it because she ended up asking me to basically tell her what happens in the entire series because she knows she'll never get the chance to watch it with me, but I might show her an episode every few weeks. I said to her, if you're going to watch the specials later this year, you're going to need to know who she is. And yeah, so I had to take the dogs for a walk then. This is Sunday. She'd gone off to visit another brother I've got in hospital and thought, well, we'll have to go down the towpath. So I'm there, getting the lead on Floss, getting the lead on Sally. Think I'm going to have to wear these wellies. So I'll get wellies from where my wellies usually are underneath the stairs, put them on, and immediately realise that my father's taken my wellies to Scotland and these are his. Well, I've never driven in wellies before and I don't think I'll be doing it again. My goodness, I haven't driven so badly since I failed my driving test. Got to the towpath, walked down it, was good to have wellies on actually because even with wellies it was still slippery as heck. Got to the bridge, turned round, came home. The dogs were thrilled. We always have a little bit of a Sunday stroll. I don't go for all this gadding about on a Sunday because everybody else is gadding about hiking into the hills and what have you. You can never get anywhere. Told you once about the time that somebody decided that they wanted to get some perfect photos for Instagram, so they'd let their dogs loose behind my car and I'm there trying to get Sally into the car so I can go home, and they're there unleashing these flaming predatory French bulldogs that just come yapping. And then they stood behind my car. I'm like, it's one of the things I can't stand. Either go for a walk or go home. People do this, you know. They drive up to the forest, we'll walk about 2 minutes up the road, get an Instagram-worthy photo with the dog, and then return to the car. Dog's missed out on a walk now, but at least you got a photo to look like you're being healthy on Instagram, Chuck. Probably begging off to McDonald's after that. My goodness. I do feel sorry for the dogs then. Even Sally agrees. She doesn't really. The postman's just been. You should see how bedraggled she looks having been woken up so quick. That was another thing Sunday. I switched on that Serengeti TV show on BBC One. First time I've ever seen that dog watching telly. She was intent on it. I've never seen anything like it. I was thrilled. Finally got to see the lady who's helping me learn Italian. She had a bit of an illness, so that's why I hadn't seen her. She wasn't upset at me. I'd sold her something a few weeks ago and I'd got me numbers mixed up and I said cinquanta when I meant quindici and I thought I'd really upset her. But no, she's just been poorly. So on the one hand, not happy she's been poorly, but on the other hand, very thrilled that she's not annoyed with me. At least I hope she's not annoyed with me. She could also completely despise me. They're not really mutually exclusive. Anyway, I'm going to go and finish my pot of coffee and possibly read, possibly write. I'm trying to get a piece of writing that I'm currently working on up to 10,000 words. But that's a story for another day. What you're reading, what you're writing, what you're watching, what you're listening to. Let me know in the comments. I hope that you got something out of this video because until next time, that is all.